What's going on, everybody? In this week's lesson, we are going to check out a whole slew of ways that we can practice the chord scale. Now, a lot of you that are familiar with this channel have heard me talk about this before. I think it's one of the most useful things that we as guitar players can incorporate into our daily practice routine because we can kind of use it as a foundation to kind of work on a whole different variety of techniques that will, one, turn us into better guitar players and musicians, as well as kind of open up the fretboard for ourselves. Now, just a quick note on tuning. This guitar is in E flat standard. It's just down a half step. That doesn't really concern you in this video. I'm still going to talk about it as if I'm in standard tuning. All right, so let's jump in. Why the chord scale? Like, what are we going to get out of this? Music theory is kind of like saying math, right? So many students are like, well, I want to learn more about music theory. Well, that's like saying I want to learn math, right? It's a gigantic, generalized umbrella term. And we don't really have to get lost in the weeds as guitar players, right? So learning our chord scale, well, it's going to help us learn what a scale is. And then from there, we can learn about keys, right? And the chords that are found in that. And you'll see that when you learn songs, most of them are in a key, and we can learn about chord functions and chord progressions, right? So how are we going to do this, right? Well, first, let's just look at what is a scale for my absolute beginners out there, and we can visualize this on the fretboard. So if I'm in the key of, say, G, I'm on the low string, 3rd fret, we can visualize a scale horizontally by a formula that probably many of you have seen on the internet, right? Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, right? And on the guitar, a whole step is 2 frets, a half step is 1 fret. So if we follow that formula, whole step, half step, and then 3 whole steps, and then half step. 15 minus 12 is 3. We ended up where we started, okay? So now that's a scale. So now base level here, right, is being able to, instead of just playing that single notes, let's play some power chords. Right? So just being able to see that on the guitar, right, especially in that particular key, you can pretty much play every Metallica song and see all the chords that are there, right? So we can sit here and do things like that and have a map for ourselves that we know will sound good. You might even want to learn what the interval of a power chord is. They're all fifths, right? That means the ring finger note is 5 notes away from the root note, which is why when you look at tabs or transcription books, you might see things such as G5, A5, E5. That's telling you, the guitar player, to play a G and a 5th. And when we play power chords, we do that automatically. So using that, we can transform, instead of power chords or fifths, we can look at thirds. Same idea, different shape. We have, and this will also introduce us to the idea of major and minor chords, okay? So we have G on 3, B on 2. G, A, B, thirds, right? Every other note. Now, if I play this short diagonal half step, 3 on the low string, 2 on the 5th string, that is what we call a major third. And if I go to the next note of the scale, 5, I have to play 3 on the 5th string. And that's known as a minor third. And now, before I even explain that further, this gets us into what the chord scale actually is, right? We build a chord on every note of the scale, and in doing so, we get a particular order of major and minor chords, and it's a formula, and it does not change, right? So the first one is major, the next 2 are minor, the next 2 after that are major, and then the next 2 after that are minor, and then the asterisk diminished chord, right? But when we play thirds, it'll just be a minor third, all right? And then we get back to our chord, our root note. So that's major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, minor, major again. very useful. And then we can start seeing what the harmony is. And then, you know, I made a video on power chords before, like getting out of power chords and learning some new chords. And if you have a riff, well, instead of power chords, I can play thirds. Right? And I get a whole new sound. Next thing you know, I sound like Megadeth. And I would do that across multiple octaves. Right? And we'll come back to that one later, but super useful again for our fretboard vision, right? Power chords, the thirds. Next on the list, let's talk about bar chords. It's a lot of struggle for us guitar players in the beginning, right? We have basically 3 basic major shapes that you should be able to do, and you can do the chord scale in all 3 of the shapes, right? Sticking in the same key, this is the major bar chord with the middle finger on the 3rd string, and I'm using my first finger across, right? It's a little tight up there, so we might want to go to the next string. But again, there's our chord scale. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. Super tight up there. If we go to the next string, right? That's the next kind of basic chord shape, the 5th string major bar chord. And then the other one, if you're familiar with the cage system, is this shape. It's essentially a barred C shape. If I take that down in the open position, it's just the C chord, right? So I can go. I can use that shape to go up and down the chord scale, right? Which starts getting me into some how to practice your arpeggios, which we'll talk about a little later. But I highly encourage you to take your chord scale and learn your bar chords, learn some new chords. You can even take all those major minor chords and turn them into seventh chords, all right? Which again, a very useful color for song writing, especially in other genres. So now that we've actually talked about bar chords a little bit, we can remove the bar chord and play thirds again. But this time, I can take this and put it an octave up, right? And that's, some of you might know that as tenths, right? We're just taking the third and putting it up an octave, right? But it's still just a third, just up an octave, right? So it's basically the middle finger note on this chord, or when I make it minor, it has to come down a half step. Major third, minor third. And again, really, really nice sound. Right? If you're familiar with, say, the Beatles, right? This is the Beatles. They do this a lot. Right? You'll see it in a lot of other genres too, but I like to call that the Beatles, the 10th exercise. That's a whole slew of ways that we can use the chord scale to practice a variety of chords on the guitar. The more chords you know, the better. That brings us to talk about triads, right? Triads are often extremely neglected when it comes to us guitar players. And they are so vital for every other instrument, so we might as well learn them, right? So if I take that bar chord and I just look at the first, say, 3 strings of that, that's a G major chord, right? That's a triad. And we have 3 inversions. But what I would recommend doing is taking each inversion or each shape and going up the chord scale, right? If this is the major shape, well, this is the minor shape. And that will teach us where the third is in each one of those shapes. Right? Good for our vision and melody writing, guitar soloing. So I can take that shape each one of those. And practice my chord scale like that. And I can transform that into a picking exercise. I can pick those out. I can transpose those across all the string sets, or I'm not going to get into that here, but triads are super important. Another way that you can practice your triads is maybe a vertical in a box kind of position, right? And you see a lot of players will practice like this. I'll come up to say C, right? And I'll play, that's a C major triad. And I'll do that for every note in the scale. Another very useful exercise. What else can we do? We talked about really fast before turning your major chords into seventh chords. We can expand on that and maybe do some horizontal work through seventh chords. They're great for legato, great for a nice modal, shred, arpeggios, and all that kind of stuff. So I can just go to each one of these and play the corresponding seventh chords. That's a major seventh chord shape. The minor seventh chord shape is, right? And we're not going to get into it in this video, but then you can use that to kind of dissect, all right, well, what's changing from a major seven to a minor seven? What's the difference? And we can see that visually on the guitar, which is really nice, right? Major third, fifth, major seven, half step. If I go up to the next note, it's a minor third, fifth, and then a minor seventh. Whole step behind that root. Right? Very nice, useful exercise. You can work on legato, you can pick that out. Super fun to do, great sound, right? I was playing Protest the Hero, Blood Meat, the other day, and there's a part where he's playing literally that major seven. So these are very common things that we can use to expand our vision. Before, when we were talking about thirds, I mentioned moving it to different string sets, right? And this gets us into some more soloing technique. For all you Metallica Kirk Hammett fans out there, I can take, you know, great little soloing kind of legato pull-off exercise, and I just call that the Kirk Hammett because he tends to do that in the pentatonic boxes and use this kind of thing where you pull off once and then pull off twice, you know, and I can just use that to go right down the chord scale. Right? We can take that a little further, right? Do some like faux sweeping or get into our sweep picking. Just take that same shape and expand it down to the third string. Right? And we can get into some sweep technique. And again, using the chord scale as something to play, as something to keep the technique going across the fretboard. While we're still talking about arpeggios, you know, another fun way to do some string skipping a la Paul Gilbert, right? I can take that arpeggio, but skip the B string, and I get this shape, right? Really fun to do. And again, I can go down the chord scale. Nice. Very fun. All right, so I think that's enough of the chord ideas. Let's talk a little bit about picking or scale fragments, right? We talked about moving the scale, so one thing that's kind of common, and this will introduce us to the unique mode shapes on the guitar as well. I could take the major scale and play, say, the first 6 notes, right? And I can do that starting on every note of the scale. And it kind of, like I mentioned before, it introduces us to each mode, the sound, but every one of those is going to sound like the corresponding root note chord. You know, so I can play. And so on, right? Really great way to kind of work on some picking. Right? We've kind of basic chords, we've done arpeggios, and now we can kind of work on our picking. And last but not least, a fun way, we're picking out chords again, right? Let's move to the high string. Now, a lot of times we practice our chords up and down, right? There's basically our arpeggio, right? But what we can do is we can kind of octave displace, there's a fancy term, right? Where instead of going up, right, I can play the root note and go down. Really fun way to use it. And again, it's a totally new way to see your arpeggios. And again, you can put that on the low strings as well. And it works really just wonders for kind of seeing, again, opening up the map of your guitar, fretboard vision, seeing guitars, being able to play chord progressions, right? So there you go. Taking the chord scale to practice a variety of different things that we as guitar players should be practicing. Chords, intervals, arpeggios, picking, scale fragments, all of that kind of stuff. And we can use the chord scale to kind of help guide us along and teach us about chord progressions, right? And that's the most important thing, okay? So down in the description below, you can find a link for all the tabs that you saw across the screen. If you want to see a deep dive into any one of these specific techniques, feel free to leave me a comment below. If you like what's going on, please click that subscribe button, the notification bell, and as always, let me know what you come up with. So until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.